On the path to violence.
April 20th, 1999. It felt like the beginning of a new and terrible era in America, where parents feared that their kids would go to school in the morning and never come home. Two students walked into Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado and shot dead 13 people and then killed themselves. When Sue Klebold heard about the shooting, she panicked and hoped her son was safe. Then she learned that he was one of the shooters.
I was completely confused. I didn't know what had happened or why. I was trying to accept that my son was dead, that he was being held responsible for this terrible, terrible tragedy.
Klebold says after the incident, his son Dylan was called many things.
My son was called a monster. He was called evil.
But that wasn't the boy she knew.
He was kind and friendly and nice and gentle.
Then, months after his death, she discovered a side of her son that he'd hidden from nearly everyone. The police returned his journals to her.
There I could clearly see. Here was a young man who was saying, I am in agony. I want to get a gun. I want to kill myself. He was saying that when he was 15 years old.
His writings reveal that he'd been depressed and suicidal for almost 2 years before the shooting. Now, it's almost impossible to empathize with someone like that. The brutality of their crime is unspeakable. Psychologist John Van Drill gets that.
Someone went out of their way to target and kill children who look like our children and teachers who look like our teachers, and did it for no other reason than to hurt them, and that's very personal.
Van Drill directs the Safety and Risk Management Program at Salem-Keizer Public Schools in Oregon. But he and other psychologists do think about what it's like to be one of these kids, because they want to figure out how to prevent these shootings and keep children safe. There's no official count of school shootings. An extensive Washington Post database shows more than 230 incidents where a gun was fired at K-12 schools since Columbine. 6 of those were mass shootings. And here's what experts have learned about school shooters. Most have had one struggle after another.
My assumption, based on years of research into dozens of perpetrators, is that there are significant psychological issues.
Peter Langman is a psychologist in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and the author of the book Why Kids Kill: Inside the Minds of School Shooters.
So whether or not they've ever been diagnosed, whether or not they're severely mentally ill, something is going on that could be addressed through some kind of treatment.
But most never got treatment. Even though they had childhood traumas, unstable homes, they felt like outcasts at school where they'd been bullied and many had experienced severe losses. The defendant in the case of the shooting in Parkland, Florida last year, his mother died the year before the shooting. His father died when he was a little boy. John Van Drill says these struggles add up over time.
They don't feel very good about themselves or where they're headed in their life. They may wish someone would kill them, or they may wish that they could kill themselves.
Most of these kids were in despair. Many did kill themselves in their attacks. But most people who are feeling suicidal don't attack others, and most people with mental illness are not violent. So what makes a tiny percentage of kids become violent and homicidal? Van Drill and other experts think it's because these kids have been struggling alone and failing for a long time, and their despair had turned into anger. Reed Malloy is a forensic psychologist and has consulted with the FBI.
There's loss, there's humiliation, there's anger, and then there's blame.
Blame, a precursor to violence. These individuals had a history of collecting grievances and fantasizing about revenge.
And the fantasy is one in which the teenager begins to identify with other individuals that have become school shooters that have used violence as a way to solve their problems.
And access to guns turns that fantasy into a reality. But psychologists say these attacks can be prevented. There are often weeks or months in the planning. And John Van Drill says there are signs that someone's struggling and heading towards violence.
I've stopped being the kid that went to Boy Scouts and church and loved his grandmother, and now I want to be that kid with camouflage who's isolated and attacks people and hurts them.
14 months before Columbine, Helen Klebold, who was a gifted student, started to get into trouble. He and his friend Eric Harris got arrested after they broke into a van and stole some equipment. His mother was concerned. She asked him, did he need therapy? He said no, but she never realized how deep the problem really was.
The piece that I think where I fail the most is that we tend to underestimate the level of pain that someone may be in. We all have a responsibility to stop and think someone we love may be in a crisis.
The solution isn't to expel or suspend the student, which is what happened to her son. Time and again, psychologists and educators have found that what these kids need is support and help. Tomorrow Morning Edition, what schools are doing to prevent troubled students from going down the path to violence. Rita Chatterjee, NPR News.
Mexican and U.S. border authorities have put journalists covering the caravans of Central American migrants under unusual scrutiny. In one case, a photojournalist was denied re-entry into Mexico. Media rights groups say the trend is troubling and infringes on press freedom. NPR's Carrie Kahn reports.
Freelance photographer Mark Abramson spent the last 2 weeks of December in Tijuana, Mexico, covering the recent arrival of Central American migrants to the northern border city. When he finished his assignment and attempted to cross back into the U.S. through the port of entry in San Diego, California, he says a U.S. Customs and Border Protection agent referred him to a secondary inspection waiting room.
They had me leave my stuff there. I couldn't take it with me, and a plainclothes agent took me into another interrogation room with no windows to question me for about 30 minutes.
Abramson says the agent, who was friendly, began asking him questions about his work assignments and whether he could identify the leaders of the migrant caravan. Abramson says it's his job to inform the public, not the U.S. government. Alexandra Ellerbeck with the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists says they have received complaints from as many as 8 journalists who were referred to secondary inspections at U.S. border entries and asked similar questions. In one case, 2 U.S. photographers were shown pictures and asked them to identify so-called instigators of the caravan. Ellerbeck says she's concerned about U.S. agents' actions.
And try to get information from journalists about their sources or their reporting, information they're gathering, and has huge implications for press freedom.
Ellerbeck says her group has received complaints, too, about journalists and immigration lawyers being denied re-entry into Mexico after working with migrants from the caravan. U.S. Customs and Border Protection did not have a comment available for this report, nor did Mexico's National Immigration Agency. Carrie Kahn, NPR News.
This is NPR News.
And this is Northwest Public Broadcasting. I'm Tom Kilcannon. Democratic presidential candidates are campaigning a lot in Southern Carolina.
You cannot love your country unless you love your fellow countrymen and women. You may not always agree with them.
We'll learn why this solidly red state is so crucial for Democrats running for president. We'll hear more at 5:40 on All Things Considered.
Program support for Northwest Public Broadcasting comes from Vokes Shoes, fitting Central Washington with running footwear, including Brooks, 361, and Hoka. Vokes Shoes, family owned and operated in Yakima, Chalet Place. Store and product information on Facebook or at vauxshoes.com.
School districts around the region are announcing closures and delays for tomorrow, including Port Angeles, Bellingham, and Mount Baker districts. The complete list is at nwtv.org. And not all school districts report to Northwest Public Broadcasting, so if you think your school district may be closed, check locally. And I-90 Stowe-Coley Pass is still closed. Opening time is still unknown, and we'll give you updates as they're available. And Stevens Pass and Blue Pass are currently snowing, and oversized loads are prohibited. NPR News headlines are next, and Northwest Public Broadcasting News is in the NPR News and Clover Certified for the first state of the state streets by things that move